You're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 1037 on your dial, and globally at WPVMLP.org.
Bountiful valley, way up high, fertile and green land of the sky. Tip of the Blue Ridge mountain range, link the autumn's lingering springs. Up on the parkway, take a drive, float down the French Broad, take a dive, maybe enjoy a local brew. All that and built more too in Asheville.
Well, that's Queen Bee and the Honey Lovers. It's Wednesday at 10 o'clock, so you know it's time for Storyville. Usually I'm your host, Chuck Fink, but today we're going to switch the table around and instead I'm going to be the guest. So many people have asked me, Chuck, you're a storyteller. It's your show. Why don't you be a guest? So today I'm going to honor that request and I'm going to introduce to you one of the best guest hosts I've ever known in my life. She's fantastic. Here is Cindy Berryman Fink, my wife. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, thank you, Chuck. I am delighted to be hosting Storyville this morning. And as Chuck said, he is the guest today, and he is an amazing and talented person. Let me tell you a little bit about Chuck Fink. He hails from Cincinnati, where he had a successful 30-year career in sales and organizational development. And in that career, stories became the vehicle that he used to engage learners in his workshops. And in 2008, he retired to Asheville with his lovely, smart, wise, and incredibly cool wife. He told me to say that. Here he dove into the art of personal storytelling as a semi-professional at the age of 62. He has appeared in numerous shows throughout the Asheville area and in Jonesboro, Tennessee, telling personal stories that are filled with angst, drama, and a healthy dose of humor. He teaches classes on creating and telling personal stories at the Asheville Area Learning and Retirement Center, OLLI at UNC Asheville. And Chuck is a member of the Asheville Storytelling Circle, the National Storytelling Network, and the North Carolina Storytelling Guild. So today you are the lucky listener of Chuck Fink's Stories. So Chuck, tell folks how long you've been married and how many times you count your lucky stars.
Well, first of all, I've been married to the most incredible woman I've ever met and anyone else could ever meet. We've been married 40 years, and that was last August. And because of the pandemic, it was a kind of a strange year to celebrate a momentous anniversary. Would you agree?
Yes, and I also would say that time flies when you're having fun. 40 years hardly seems possible.
Oh, that's easy for you to say.
Okay, you mentioned, or I mentioned in the intro, that you use stories to engage learners and listeners when you were a trainer. How did you do that? How did stories make a difference in your corporate training?
Well, first of all, it started with me being on the other side of the platform, so to speak, as a learner. I was always bored by lectures. I have a very low attention span, as you well know. So I would hear that stuff and I would just kind of fade away. And then when someone would tell a story, a teacher, I perked up. So I realized early on there's something attached to stories and learning. And as I became a trainer, I realized it was through stories that I got the attention of folks. Let me just a very brief example. I had a lot of trouble teaching the concept of a liar not necessarily being a liar. And this is to supervisors and managers, and they're so quick to pass judgment. He's a liar. Well, in order to kind of counter that, I would tell a story about our son being a little toddler and knocking over a lamp in the basement, and we heard this crash, bang, boom, and I ran down to see what it was, and I said, son, what happened? The dog knocked over the lamp. It wasn't me. And I just went, oh, and shut up. And by the way, you know how hard that is for me to shut up. So I shut up, and with the silence, he finally broke out and told the truth. Well, I was playing with a dog. I was chasing it, and I don't know which one of us started out. I'm sorry, Dad. And that's all I wanted. I wanted the truth. So I would convey that story to the learners or the participants in my class, and they would immediately get the concept. So that, and I would use it over and over again. But that was my favorite one because I got to play a little kid.
Okay, yeah. So you tell us a little bit about that story of our son and the broken lamp. Tell us a little more about our family. How did you use storytelling when raising our sons?
Well, first of all, let me define, in my view, what storytelling is, and I'm going to clean this up a lot. I call it BSing with an attitude. Cindy, do you know, do I have any of those qualities?
No, I've never heard you BS, and I've certainly never heard you BS with an attitude.
I'm so glad I passed on my gift of BSing to you. Well, yeah. Yeah, the BSing would occur, and I realized with our kids, stories would put them to sleep. As a child, I never had my parents read to me, so I didn't know what it would work. And then I found the what's the one about the cow jumping over the moon? Uh,
Oh, I
Midnight
should know that. Good night, moon.
Good Night Moon.
Good
Thank you.
night, moon.
Moon. And with that story, I just realized the kids were so into it. And then, how many times can you read the same book? So I just started making them up, as in BSing. And I would just go on, and then I would come up with an ending that I knew would really grab them, and they would fall asleep. So we have two sons, as you well know, I think.
Yeah, I had a little bit to do with that.
So they tell me. And our older son, Drew, is now 36, I believe. Yeah. And our younger son, Greg, just turned 32. And Greg lives out in LA. He's a struggling Uber driver slash actor or actor slash Uber driver, trying to make it in LA. And by the way, his entire education, folks, was about acting. We sent him to the School for Creative and Performing Arts from 7th grade through 12th, went to a college for conservatory. This young man has talent, extraordinary talent, but he's having a tough time, as most young actors do. Our other son, Drew, our older son, is 36, and Greg is I don't know, his right side of the brain you can get, creative, innovative. Drew is his left side of the brain as you can get because he's quite analytical. He's quite the thinker. In fact, his job is an IT director of a company. So you have an actor and you have an IT guy. So my stories had to kind of go between those two different styles as they were growing up. But oh, what fun it was.
You know, you were reminiscing about telling the boys stories when they were very young to have them go to sleep rather than reading stories. Do you remember that we also got them engaged in the stories? You would start the story and then they would add to the story. So they were storytelling at 4, 5, 6 years old, which is such a gift.
Well, that was the gift of passing on that gene to them. The gene that starts with a B and ends with an S.
All
So
right, how
I think
about
it was through stories that I wanted to teach them the same thing. And
right, exactly. So, how about telling one of your family stories, the one that you know is so near and dear to my heart?
well, folks, this story is very, very special. It involves one of the most important people in my life, even though I knew her for such a short time. Winters in Cincinnati can be kind of trying. It can be very snowy, very cold. And I happen to live in a section called Mount Adams. It was also nicknamed the Hill. It's next to downtown. It was a little hilly area, and it was kind of hip at the time. They let me in, by the way. I didn't pass the credentials, but they managed to let me in. So it was a cold January night, and a buddy of mine, we're going to go to a basketball game, but instead we decided we're going to go to a local bar. And the local pub it's an English style pub in Mount Adams called the Blind Lemon. You go in and you go around the backside and you're actually in the ground floor level, and it's this real cozy little kind of English pub, smoke-filled room, music. So my buddy and I walk in and it's packed. We don't know where to sit. Well, there's one table available, and in that table were two young women and a man. So my buddy and I, he was kind of tall, and Cindy, you might know, I'm not exactly the tallest guy in the room. Okay, folks, I'm 5'6". So as we're sitting down, I said to my friend Gary, well, why don't you sit next to the girl with the bigger bone structure? And I'll sit next to this petite little thing next to me. So I decided I was going to start up a conversation, and I said, what's your name? My name is Cindy Berryman. Where are you from? I'm from Westport, Massachusetts, by way of Fall River. Ooh, Massachusetts. Well, what do you do? I am a professor at the University of Cincinnati. That's kind of nice, but let's see, you said Fall River. And then, folks, I knew what to do. I had been developing a, quote, Kennedy accent since I was 13 years old, so I poured it on. On behalf of the people of this bar, I want to welcome you to the city of Cincinnati. She was so unimpressed, but she gave me her phone number anyway, and from that point on, we fanned the flames of our romance. And that was in January, until about October that year, it was time for us to go to Westport, Massachusetts, and meet Cindy's mother, Gertie. Westport, Massachusetts is like no other place in all of New England and probably this country. It's a small, populated town. It only at the time had 7,000, but it's the largest landmass of any town in Massachusetts. It's got 16 miles of shoreline, 16 miles of beach. It's beautiful. It has pasture land. And as you go down Main Road to the town Pier, or as normal people would say, Pier, you go down to the town Pier, and on either side of the street, you have these houses with these Revolutionary War placards like Benjamin Franklin Davis, Minuteman, 1773. You're walking around Nirvana, and at the end of the pier, you see lobster pots. So we drove to 126 Sanford Road, Cindy's home. And as we drove in, out popped this wonderful, wiry little lady with gray hair, alabaster hair, kind of looked like Granny Clampett, if you can get that vision. And she comes running out of the house and grabs both of us and just says, oh, I'm so happy to see you. And folks, this is Massachusetts. People are not supposed to be that warm and effervescent. So Gertie kind of broke that rule. And she said, come on in. As we came in, she asked the most important question of our entire relationship. You want a beer? Let me translate that again. You want a beer? If I had said no, that relationship would have been gone. Gertie loved her beer. So I said, sure. And she poured some beers. As she's pouring, I'm looking around this humble home, and I see on the walls there are only two pictures. One was of Pope John the 23rd, and he's on a wall. And on the opposite wall is the Pope of Massachusetts, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And then Cindy had told me that Gertie had a really good sense of humor, and she loved to play practical jokes. So we're sitting at the table, and I said, hey, Get, did you hear they're building a McDonald's down by the town pier? What? Well, I hope they don't spoil the sunbathing down there. That was Gertie, just took it in stride. And we joked and we kidded around, and Cindy made a wonderful lobster dinner. Actually, she forgot to turn on the heat. But about an hour later, we had a wonderful lobster dinner, and we drove off. It was just about a few months later that we drove back to Westport, but this time it was for our marriage. It was for our wedding. And what a wedding it was. The night before was the rehearsal dinner. My father, who was a very formal kind of guy, said, I want to welcome all of you to this rehearsal dinner for my son, Jack, and his wife, Cindy. Dad, my name is Chuck, not Jack. So we were off to kind of an inauspicious beginning. He decided he wanted to pass a little recorder around so people could give us their well wishes. And the first person he gave it to, he said, I want to give it to the matriarch of the family, Gertie. And she looked at the thing. She said, this is another one of those practical jokes that Chuck is pulling on me. He's always pulling a practical joke. We said, no, Gertie, it's real. You can speak into it. She said, yeah. And she picked it up and she just said, Cindy, Chuck, good luck. And that was it. That was Gertie, an economy of words, but with those few words, she said everything. Well, the next day was our wedding, and to see these two Berryman women hop down the aisle, they were just happy. The reason that Gertie walked Cindy down the aisle is Cindy's father had passed away when Cindy was but 15 years of age. There was only one person she was going to have walk her down that aisle, and it was Gertie. And they were just having a time, and they were cutting up and laughing. And that night, oh, that night was a night to remember. Gertie was having the time of her life. She was dancing with everyone, the officiant, all of her grandkids, everybody who was in the room. She was dancing. And we were all so thrilled because we knew Gertie had stage 4 colorectal cancer with just but a few months to live. Well, Cindy and I went on our honeymoon, and we came back, and we were only married for about a month or maybe a little bit more, and Cindy gets a phone call from her uncle. As she gets off the phone, she starts, oh my God, I don't want my dad, I want my mom to die alone. I just hugged her and said, baby doll, Gertie's coming to live with us. So we brought Gertie in from Massachusetts to our little apartment in Cincinnati, and for the rest of the time, Gertie was with us. Gertie didn't come really to live with us. She came to die in our company. And Cindy had the tough part. Cindy had to take care of her mother's massive physical needs, where I just became Gertie's drinking buddy. We would just get together and chat and have a good time, while Cindy had all the tough work. One day, it was a Thursday. It was late in the afternoon, and Gertie, at this point, she could hardly talk. She was riveted with pain. And she calls me in and she says, I want a beer. Let me translate again. I want a beer. Well, folks, by that time, Gertie wasn't able to use a straw, a glass, a cup. It was very difficult. There was no way of getting that beer in her mouth. So I thought, and then it hit me. I ran into the bathroom like the wind, and I rifled through that medicine cabinet, and I found it. I found that little vial of eye drops, and I squeezed out the eye drops, and then came back and sucked in some beer and just put it around Gertie's lips, and she smiled. Folks, that was the last time we saw Gertie alive. During the night, we would always come in and check, and I came in, and Gertie had passed away. Gertie's wishes were to be cremated and to have her ashes spread on her lovely hometown beach in Westport, Massachusetts. So we followed her wishes and we brought her ashes back up to Westport. It was a March day. To say it was chilly in New England in March is kind of understating it. It was really cold. It must have been like 20 degrees. So we're at the beach, and it's Cindy and me and Cindy's sister Pauline. Oh, let's hurry this up. It's so cold. It's so cold. And Uncle Nick. Uncle Nick apparently had some relationships with some unsavory types, because he would say stuff like, yeah, you see that guy over there? Yeah. Yeah, well, his brother just pulled a 7. Nick, what's a 7? You know, when you're dead, your legs are straight out, your feet are up. Yeah, we call that a 7. That was Nick. It was my duty, my job, and I loved it, to spread the ashes of my beloved mother-in-law. So with as much love and care as I could, I went out onto a jetty and leaned over to spread the ashes when, just then, a wave came crashing over and knocked me into the water. It was cold, and I came out, and Pauline said, oh, he's going to catch a death of a cold. Let's get him inside, quick. And everybody was so upset, and I just came out of the water laughing my butt off, because Gertie got the last laugh on me. I love you, Gertie. I love you, Cindy. Thank you all.
Oh, whenever you tell that story, it totally tugs at my heartstrings. It's such a beautiful story. And it's such a beautiful, gracious, and giving and loving thing that you decided that Gertie would come to live with us and die with us when you had only met her, I think, 2 times in your life. And this was 6 weeks after we had gotten married. It's just amazing. And as you know, Gertie died 40 years ago last week.
Yeah.
Okay, let's.
Cindy, one other thing, and we even chatted about this very recently. With Gertie, she had such an impact, and like you said, in a short time on my life. And she is everything. She is your foundation. I once ended that story by saying, to know Cindy is to know Gertie, and to know Gertie is to know Cindy. So because of that, Gertie is always ever present in our hearts and our minds. And she was just such a special, special woman.
Yeah. Yeah. And they say as long as there's people that lovingly remember you, you still live. And she obviously still lives in our hearts. Thank you, Chuck. All right, let's change it up a little bit here. I mentioned in the intro that you're a member of the Asheville Storytelling Circle. What is that, and what do you do as a member?
Well, the Asheville Storytelling Circle began 25 years ago. A woman, Sandra Gudger, realized there's a storytelling community in Asheville, but there was no organization to support the storytellers. So she formed the Asheville Storytelling Circle. And what it is, it's a group of storytellers. Some are professional, some are semi professional, which is what I am, which means the professionals earn their living from storytelling. As a retiree, I don't need to earn my living from it, but occasionally I'll get paid, and that's nice because it kind of validates the fact that I'm a storyteller. But we also have amateurs, people that are just trying it out for the first time, and then we have people that come just to listen because we meet once a month, and in that month, we get familiar again with one another, and then we start telling our stories. It's a wonderful place to workshop stories. And the circle also, besides meeting, we also produce and promote storytelling shows. The biggest is Telebration. Telebration is handled once a year in October, and it's not just Asheville. Telebration is a worldwide event with storytelling clubs and associations all around the world, starting their shows at exactly the same time, 10 o'clock. So we do that, and actually, it was just I think last week where we had a show at Ollie, where four of us were telling stories on a Zoom storytelling show to members of Ollie. There are 2,500 members of Ollie, and I must say, not all of them were there, but we had a pretty good turnout. So that's the circle, and it just does so much good to promote people. And I must say, we have some extraordinary tellers in the circle.
And you've had several of the Asheville Storytelling Circle tellers on your Storyville radio show, have you not?
I sure have. The very first one was Donna Marie Todd, and Donna Marie is president of the Asheville Storytelling Circle, a phenomenal teller. But her story also was describing her experience that led her into her widowhood.
Mhm.
And since then, her storytelling has been a vehicle where she uses to help other widows begin to heal. Powerful, powerful person with a powerful story. And we've had some others. We've had Charlie St. Clair, and Chet Allen played Santa Claus because he looks like Santa Claus, so he was our Christmas guest. And we had both Sheelys, Catherine and Wallace Sheely. And and Larry Perlman was on our show last week, and Michael Reno Harrell. So they form a wonderful place for me to find storytellers.
Very good. A lot of talent there. And you mentioned Ollie, and of course, you teach storytelling at Ollie. Tell us about that. How do you do that? What's involved?
Well, I decided to teach this about 4 years ago. And what I did is I broke down storytelling into its very fundamental components. Like, first of all, you have to come up with an idea. So we help the participants develop an idea. And from that idea, for the rest of the class sessions, they work on that story. And I'm teaching them some concepts like delivery concepts, word development concepts, connecting with audience, all those kinds of things. And each time we meet, they then get into a workshop group, a breakout group. And within those groups, they develop their stories and they coach each other. And then it culminates with the last session where they share their stories with us. It's so much fun, Cindy, to see these folks come in apprehensive, unsure, without any confidence, and come out as ready to roll storytellers.
What a gift, because, as you've said many times, everybody has stories, but not everybody knows that they can tell those stories. So how wonderful you help them develop that talent.
Thank you.
All right, you've already mentioned your definition of storytelling, BSing with an attitude. Do you have a story that fits that definition of storytelling?
Well, I think I have one, and I think this one you might be able to relate to. I don't know. We'll see. It's been a pandemic, folks, and people are trying to find meaning to replace their former activities however they can. My wife, Cindy, hi there, developed her own activity to help her find meaning in retirement. She decided to write her memoir, or actually, it's a collection of personal stories. It was called Beware of Hanging Icicles Tales of a New England Girl. And the memoir, the book, captures her youth in beautiful Westport and not so beautiful Fall River, where she was born and initially raised. Well, Fall River is kind of an industrial town. It's pretty bleak. So Cindy lived in what was called a tenement apartment building, and there was a narrow alleyway, and on the other side was another tenement apartment building. And it just so happened her window and the window of another little girl matched up so they could tell stories and share secrets, and then they had a clothesline where they could exchange notes. These two little ones at age 4 on became best friends. So Cindy wrote a chapter called I Married My Childhood Sweetheart. What? Childhood sweetheart? It's me. I'm a man. What are you talking about? And then she said, well, Rochelle and I have a lot of similar attributes. And I'm thinking, no way. I'm a man. She's a woman. She's kind of wild and crazy. And since I married Cindy, I've become rather sedate. So then I started thinking, well, maybe we do have some stuff in common. Let's see. We're both extroverts. We never shy away from the spotlight. We kind of enjoy the drama of the spotlight. We love taking risks, love adventure. And then there's one that I shouldn't admit this, but it's in her book. So if she can write her book, I'm going to tell you all. She says that Rochelle and I are equally anal in the fact that we are the only two people in Cindy's life who, upon leaving the bathroom, have to share the intimate details of the outcomes of that experience. If you catch my drift. Oh, folks, you don't want to catch that drift. I promise you, don't catch that drift. And then there's Cindy. Let's see. Cindy is an introvert. She's rather reserved. Cindy's risk averse. Oh, risk? Are you kidding? She's a college professor. They don't understand risk. She shuns drama. But most of all, she keeps her poop to herself. Well, and then what about Cindy and Rochelle? Well, Cindy and Rochelle, they played a lot of pranks. They did a lot of their own little adventures, always led by Rochelle. Cindy was the follower, Rochelle was the leader. And Rochelle and I share something else in common. We love to torture Cindy with practical jokes and humor. And then, on top of that, Rochelle and I are very competitive to see who can be the most extreme with Cindy. Let me give you a couple of ideas. Cindy and Rochelle grew up in Fall River, and they would go outside and just play. They had the freedom to play wherever they wanted to. Well, one day they walked past a barn, and Rochelle says to Cindy, I dare you to climb up to that roof, and when you do, I'll join you, but I dare you. I bet you won't climb up that roof. And there was a ladder leaning up on the side of the barn to that roof. Well, Cindy was very dutiful, and Rochelle asked her to do something. She wasn't always happy, but she dutifully climbed that ladder. And as soon as she got to the top, the farmer ran out of the house yelling and screaming, get off of that roof! Get off of that roof! Cindy finally came down off that roof, and as she's walking down, Rochelle turns to the farmer and says, I told her not to go up there. Well, she got Cindy on that one, but I think mine might have even been a little bit better because I also like to torment Cindy because of her gullibility. Gullibility. Our sons used to kid Cindy by saying, gullible was written on the ceiling. You saw that? Yeah, every time gullible was written on the ceiling, Cindy would look up. So, this is what I did. Now, folks, my favorite holiday, bar none, is April Fool's. There's no religious connotation. There's no patriotic connotation. Nobody has to prove that they're better than everyone else. It's just fun. It's just humor. So, here's my favorite April Fool's joke on Cindy. Cindy was a college professor, like I said. I understood the university mailing system, so I knew exactly when to drop a letter in the mail so it would reach Cindy's desk on April the 1st. I conjured this up in my mind and I wrote out a love letter. Oh, folks, it was a very explicit love letter, barring nothing. And then I sent it. Oh, by the way, that love letter was written by a student. Oh, and by the way, a female student. It was written by me, but it was signed by an anonymous female student. So I sent it in the mail, and sure enough, on April the 1st, I started thinking, what if she doesn't let me know? What if she gets the letter and doesn't tell me? What could that mean? Well, my fears were allayed because right after thinking that, the phone rings, and it's Cindy. And she's so upset. She said, "You won't believe what happened. You can't believe this. I just got this letter. It's so weird. Can I read it to you?" Well, sure. Go ahead. And as Cindy starts reading the love letter, I recite along with her, word for word. And then I shout out, "April Fools!" I got Cindy on that one, and I think it was better than Rochelle's. But Rochelle and I also found religion as a way to torture Cindy. You see, Rochelle and Cindy were both Catholic. Rochelle's aunt was a nun. One of Rochelle's favorite games to play with Cindy was to play nun. Well, how do you play nun? Well, first of all, you have to have a habit. You have to have a nun's habit, not like a drug habit, but like a nun's habit. And there's Rochelle. Her aunt is a nun. So Rochelle actually had a little miniature nun's outfit, which allowed her to be Mother Superior. Cindy, not so fortunate. All she could find was a white sheet, blood-stained white sheet. You see, Cindy had nosebleeds all the time. So she took that little blood-stained sheet and she created her own little habit. So Rochelle, as Mother Superior, at one point says, "Cindy, you must confess your sins." So Cindy kind of made them up because she was a little girl. She was kind of innocent. What does an innocent little girl do? So she made them up. Rochelle then made her serve penance. Let's see, how does a 7-year-old make a 6-year-old serve penance? She told her to stick her hands in a rose bush and then come out. Folks, I think that is really, really mean, and I'm not nearly that mean. So what I did is I would torture Cindy with Eastern European Jewish food. It's the food I grew up on. So let's see, we would have gefilte fish, or as my family would call it, filthy fish. And it's really bland and tasteless, but Cindy powered through and ate it. But the real test for Cindy and how I could really torture her was through tongue sandwiches. When I say tongue, everybody goes, "Oh, you eat tongue? It's so weird." And then I think, yeah, but you eat bacon. Where's that from? You eat eggs. Where's that from? And meanwhile, I love tongue. Cindy took one bite of it and go, she almost heaved it out. She couldn't stand it. But folks, at least I did not pull the ladder out from under her like Rochelle did. Then Rochelle finally came to visit us in Asheville. And she spent about 4 or 5 days with us. And on one of those days, the girls decided, let's go on a picnic. So we went to DuPont National Forest, just past beautiful Triple Falls. And if you go maybe a quarter of a mile or so past Triple Falls, you get to a beautiful mountain lake, Lake Julia. So we're walking around, and they brought their picnic lunch, and they're looking for a place where we can have our picnic. And you have to go down a ravine, and at the bottom of the ravine was like a sandy little spot on the beach of the lake. They go down, they check it out, and they say, "Oh, Chuck, this is perfect. You got to go down." Well, folks, let me backtrack a little bit. You see, I have some balance issues. Now, let me be specific. I have vertigo. If I'm in a condition of vertigo and someone drops a feather a mile away, it'll bowl me over and knock me over. That's how my vertigo goes. So when they say, "Come down," I said, "No, I'm good." Cindy says, "Oh, come down. It's beautiful. You must come down." Rochelle then just looks up with an attitude, says, "If you don't come down, you're a wussy." Whoa. She was attacking my manhood. I couldn't stand for that. So I took a step down, and down I went, down, 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 head first into that lake. Now, folks, you would think my wife and her best friend seeing her husband dive next head first into the lake, coming up and seeing bubbles, you think they would show some concern, some empathy, at least a there. They were laughing their tails off. Cindy just couldn't catch her breath. Rochelle was laughing so hard she had to find a place kind of hidden away because she was having liquid from another source affect her pants. Well, I think I got even because on that day when we got home, I took my wet pants and I wrung them out in Rochelle's suitcase. But you know, I really think I got the last laugh on Rochelle through this story. So Rochelle, game over. Nah. I win. Thank you.
You know, you and Rochelle really are the same person, just in very different bodies. And how fortunate am I in my early years of life to have a rule breaking, adventuresome, risk taking little friend to play with. And in my adult life to have a risk taking, rule breaking, adventuresome husband to spend my life with. I'm
I thought you were
one
going to say
pretty lucky
both.
lady.
I thought you were
Pretty
going to
lucky.
say Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Pretty lucky until April Fool's comes. You know, no April Fool's joke this year. This is the year of the pandemic. I don't need any more stress.
I swear on a stack of stories that with a lot of BS that I made up. I swear on those. I will not do April Fools this year.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go away for 24 hours. I'm just going to leave the house for 24 hours and not answer my phone.
I'll change the calendar so you won't notice.
Okay, let's get back to you helping others become storytellers in the classes you teach at Ollie. How do you tell folks that they do have good stories to tell, but they don't know how to tell them or they're unsure about telling them in public on a stage?
Well, and I get that with every single student. Only one was not afraid, but all the others are very afraid. So what I do is I just really relax with them. I sit down along with them and we just chat. And then I start the class by telling the Gertie story.
Mm.
And in the Gertie story, it connects with people our age so much that, and I do it as I just did, rather seamlessly. And then we talk about it. And I tell them, I said, that story just popped into my head one day. I was starting to develop stories, and the whole thing just came out. I said, it's really, once you get the hang of it, that's exactly how it happens. And then I hear that little sigh of relief. And just to see them go on, and with every step that they take, you can see their confidence growing. So they'll come in that way, but they sure don't leave that way.
Hmm. Yeah, and having heard shows that your students have done, they're pretty very good storytellers to say they just started and just, started taking a class in storytelling.
Well, because of the pandemic this year, we've had a couple of shows at Ollie, Zoom shows recorded, actually recorded live, I should say. And I had a class last fall, in which that one fellow who was never afraid, Dave, was a member of that class. And Dave was about 90, and he had been in the military, and he had been a priest, a reverend, a minister in Texas. And he had this booming voice, and when Dave Philpott spoke, you knew he was in the room. Well, he and another teller from the same class passed away in March at the beginning of the pandemic, although I don't think these deaths were pandemic related. They were so powerful that we decided to put on a show at Ollie, and we titled the show Stories from Heaven and Earth. And the stories from heaven came from David and the other woman. And then another fellow storyteller and I told the live stories. So that was one way we got through. And by the way, that class had already done a live show that was recorded. Well, this past fall, I taught another class. And this was taught on Zoom. And Cindy, was a totally different experience. Because of Zoom, I was able to create breakout rooms. And these folks, even more so than live, really got to be able to support one another, to help them develop stories. I would go in and check to see how they were doing, and they were doing so well. The best story from that class came from Kay. Kay told the story of how she rescued her dog, who in turn then rescued her about a half a mile out in the ocean. It was so riveting. And Kay started that class like everyone else saying, "Oh, I can't tell a story like this. Oh, I don't know what to do." And then when she came up with the idea for the story, it all came flowing out. And all of the tellers were great, but Kay, I know, captured everyone's heart.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful. So these folks in your class, do they think that they don't have stories? How do you help them find stories?
Well, I have early on the first class, I think it's my third slide. It's called Story Ideas, and they're prompts, they're story prompts. And there are things like The Vacation from Hell, things you got away with as a child that your parents never knew about, loss, just there. I think there are like 19 different general topics like that. And they sit down, they start looking at them, and they will always prompt, which is their purpose, prompt a specific idea that then becomes that one story that the student will work on for the rest of the sessions.
Yeah, when you think of just ordinary conversation or cocktail parties or dinner parties, people always tell stories. They just don't think of themselves as storytellers, probably.
Exactly. Everyone will come into the class and they'll say something like, "I don't have any stories. I don't know what to tell." And just like you said, Cindy, everyone has a story to tell. It's a matter of really digging deep. And with that story, you'll find all kinds of emotions. You'll find sadness. You'll find joy. You'll find humor. You'll find exaltation. And you'll find depression. It's just all the human emotions are in a story. So when people realize it's within them and then they get the idea, good things start to spring forth. But the hard part really is getting people to realize everyone has a story to tell. Everyone. Some of the best stories I've heard are from people that have trouble speaking. I've heard stories from people that use music to, and many storytellers will accompany their stories with music. And it is so enriching. And again, the point is I can look at any person on the street walking down, and in my mind, I'm thinking, there's a story. And that's the truth. We all have stories to tell. Look at the history of storytelling. If you go to cavemen, I guess now cave persons, and you look at the walls, there's hieroglyphics. Those are stories told. It's part of the human condition, and we don't mine that gold enough.
Yeah, the oral tradition goes way back for sure. So you talked about the history of storytelling. What do you see as the future of storytelling?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the future actually lies with our kids. So many storytellers will go to schools and they'll tell their stories. And for young children, they're usually fairy tales or jack tales. Jack tales are a story about, and they're Appalachian in origin, about a character named Jack. And there's always a moral to the story where Jack defeats the bad guys. Probably the most well known jack tale is Jack and the Beanstalk. That's a jack tale. So much more original stories, but our tellers will go to classrooms and tell those stories. And then for high schools, they'll actually work with teachers so that teachers can use story to teach concepts, kind of like I did in training. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop youth to listen to stories. And Cindy, you well know this. When we usually go to shows, a lot of people with gray hair, older people. By the way, for the audience, Cindy and I look a lot younger than we are. One of us is 70 and the other one is hovering around, but I won't give her real age.
And one of us is going to be 71 in a few weeks.
Oh, she's always there to rub it in, folks. Since we were 30, she was telling me how old a man I was. Anyway, but as storytelling audiences, you see so many older folks, very few younger folks. So when we see that as storytellers, we know that's our mission. And when we have shows and we see young people, oh, it's wonderful. Can I tell you about a time where I told the toughest story of my life and there were some young people in the audience? I won't
Sure.
tell you the details of the story because it's deeply, deeply personal. And maybe at one point on the show I'll tell it in another episode, but it involves a health condition that I have and how I had to overcome it. It's been a lifelong condition. All right, I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's a mental health condition. And my point that I make in this is that it does not define me. It is not who I am. I am Chuck Fink. I am not that condition. I have that condition like someone with a heart condition who has to manage it. Well, I tell that story, and I know in the audience are several people who themselves have a health condition, a mental health condition, and they're young. And I tell that story, Cindy, because it gives folks hope. Hope is so important. But when I tell that story about it doesn't define who I am, I'll invariably have people come up after the story thanking me because they have a loved one who's experiencing that. They have a friend who's experiencing the stigma. And what I'm talking about in that story is stigma that we impose on ourselves. We think of ourselves in those terms, and then we define ourselves that way, and that's stigma. It holds us back so much. So when I relate that part of the story, this one time, a woman came down from the stage, and she wasn't young. She was in her 40s. But she had two crutches with the handles on them, and she had multiple sclerosis. Very difficult for her to come down that stage. And she came down with tears flowing from her eyes. And she just thanked me. She wanted to hug me, but if she let go, it would not have been well. But she just bawled the jack, as my mother used to say, an expression for crying a lot, and just said, for the first time in my life, I feel free. I feel free of that stigma that I've put on myself. So storytelling can be very, very powerful. We're trying to reach younger people. And by younger people, it can be as young as kindergarten or maybe bedtime stories. But we're also trying to reach high schoolers and junior high schoolers. And it's stories like that can capture their attention. But we also have a lot of humorous stories because if you're dealing with high schoolers, you better throw some punchlines in there.
Yeah, I remember that very powerful incident of that woman coming down after your mental health story. Powerful. So stories entertain, stories are playful, stories are very powerfully emotionally, stories heal, stories bring us together.
They do. They do. And I think right now, if you look at this world, if you look at the United States, but moreover, you look at the world, we've broken off into tribes and sides, and all we do is we listen to our own side. We don't listen to others. But if someone tells a story from a different point of view, you do listen. And Cindy, I want to bring this back to you because you're in a group at Ollie. I think it's called Common Ground. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yes, common
And
ground.
isn't that about people from different points of view on the spectrum of ideas, political, social ideas?
Yes, we discuss controversial ideas from various perspectives, and the goal is to listen closely. And people do tell stories. I mean, they give data, they give facts, but they also tell personal stories. And we are to listen carefully, to listen with empathy, to try to find common ground among what we thought were major differences.
And by doing that, you're bridging a gap.
Right, right.
And so, folks, again, the point is, however you do that, we need to do more of what Cindy just said, and that's listen.
Listen. Yeah.
I once heard you have two ears and one mouth. That should tell you something. Well, Cindy, I'm going to surprise you here.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Well,
That's never good.
you might enjoy this one. Folks, a little bit about Cindy. She was a college professor for 31 years. She also was an administrator, a dean, and department, and all these fancy titles. She's written books, but she decided she wanted to retire when she had 31 years of being a professor at the university under her belt. And Cindy, why did you want to do that?
Why did I want to retire?
At a young age, you were 56.
Yes, I wanted to try some new things. And with both of my parents having died young, I thought I want to have some retirement years in case I were to die young. And I wanted to start a business. I wanted to reinvent my life. And as you know, we moved to Asheville and I started a pet care business, Pet Care Extraordinaire, where I walk dogs and feed horses and chickens and scoop litter boxes and take care of rabbits, guinea pigs, salamanders, anything anybody needs. And it's great fun.
And you love animals. And when I tell folks that, I also add, even though you were a professor of this distinguished career, you've never had more fun and in a way more meaning than when you're with another dog, a person's dog, or Rooney, our own dog.
And there's great stories that comes from taking care of animals. There's some amazingly funny and stories with pathos.
Well, what I'm gonna ask you to just throw out one. I know you haven't practiced or rehearsed, and you know it doesn't have to be perfect. But before you do that, folks, we were at a party before Cindy left the university, and the university president was there. And this is the University of Cincinnati. It had at the time about 41,000 students. So I remember Cindy telling the university president of her intention to go into doggy daycare, walking dogs. And the president just looked at me and looked at Cindy and said, "So, you're going to be dealing with a higher breed of animals." And that's so well defined. It's your transition from this distinguished career to a more enjoyable and, in a lot of ways, even a more distinguished career. Can you tell us about Rooney?
Sure, I can tell you about Rooney. Um, I have clients who asked me to find homes for homeless dogs and had a client who showed me. I met this client at a bakery, and in the back seat of this client's car was a scruffy dog, hair growing over his eyes, just very scruffy, sad looking dog, nervous dog. And I agreed to take a picture of the dog and put it on my website and try to find a home. And as you know, Chuck, after looking at that website photo day after day after day, a year and a half after we had lost our chocolate lab, Bosco, I said to you, how about if we take this dog? And you weren't really up for it at that point, but I persuaded you, and we got Rooney, and Rooney was deathly afraid of men. And so it was probably a year and a half before Rooney would even go to Chuck. Four years. And when I would leave the house for the day and Rudy would need to be walked, I'd put like a 20-foot rope on Rooney so that Chuck could reel him outside and take him for a walk at a 20-foot distance. And when I was gone, Rooney would just hide in his bed in his room, not wanting anything to do with Chuck. But over time, with treats and loving and play and walks, now Rooney loves Chuck. It took a while, but now if Chuck's gone for the day and I'm home with Rooney and Rooney hears the garage door go up, he runs to the door and he's wiggling and he's whining and he's crying, "Oh, my daddy's home, my daddy's home. I missed him so much. I thought he'd never come back." And he lavishes you with kisses and all is well.
Yeah, Rooney. And folks, by the way, the reason we named him Rooney, this dog has these really bushy eyebrows. And for folks that remember 60 Minutes, there was one of the commentators named Andy Rooney. So we named him Rooney. The people that originally rescued him called him Beavis. And just the idea of Beavis and Butthead just didn't seem right, especially with that anal thing that Cindy was talking about with Rochelle and me. So we changed it to Rooney. And one of the things I love doing with Rooney, it's kind of like juke moves, like you're running and chasing. Rooney's an athlete. He's a border terrier. And those dogs were raised on the border of Scotland and England to go on fox hunts. So they can jump, they're really mobile. And I would play this game where I would move to the left and Rooney would move to the right. And we chase each other. And that's how we develop our friendship. And we still play it, although both of us are getting a little bit long in the tooth for some of that, wouldn't you say?
I think he tires of the game before you do now.
Yeah, well, we need to exercise little Rooney a little bit more. But, oh. And folks, just a little bit of if you're seeking more information, first of all, on Pet Care Extraordinaire, what's your Facebook site, Cindy, on Pet Care?
Petcareextra.com.
PetCareExtra.com. And if you're looking for anything on me, you'll find some of my stuff on my website, ChuckFinkStoryteller.com. But you can also go to my YouTube page, and my page is Chuck Fink Storyteller. And you'll see every one of these shows posted on YouTube. And I also encourage you all, you can see it behind me, behind me. On Zoom, you don't know your left from your right. But there's WPVM FM 1037. And it's a community radio station, like storytelling. What we do on WPVM is from our heart. But there's also one other thing we have to do, and that's satisfy the FCC. So I'm going to say right now, you're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 1037 on your dial, and globally at WPVMFM.org. Cindy, this has been so much fun.
I loved it. I want to do it again.
Well, we will. We will. And by the way, the reason we're going to do it again is because you're going to be the storyteller and I'm going to be interviewing you.
Ooh, okay. I got some more pet care stories or some more Chuck Fink stories.
And folks, by the way, all this got started. Another host on a WPVM program is Blaine Greenfield, and his show is called Blaine's World. So he had me on as a guest, and afterwards he said, "Man, you really ought to have your own show." So I talked to Davine Dial, the owner general manager of WPVM, and that's how this got started. And I have never had so much fun with storytellers remotely, but still, it's a lot of fun. So again, everyone, I want to thank you all. And Cindy, you know I love you. You know you're the
Love you.
Thank you so much. And everyone, goodbye from Storyville. We'll see you next Wednesday. Bye bye.
Bye bye.